Hello lovelies, today we're taking a look at Galileo 2 Judgement Day for Lamentations of the Flame Princess, and this is a weird one but also might be my favourite out of the new raft of releases from Lamentations. It is a weird fusion of Terminator and pro wrestling and historical fantasy. It sells itself as a kind of 2-for-1 deal. I don't think that's necessarily true. I think most groups are either going to take things one way or the other way. It's quite high on the weird science factor, more than anything else. It's about 40 pages long, hardback. It's an adventure book, so all my usual sayings about the problems of reviewing adventures all apply. Basically, this takes place around Galileo, who has been placed under house arrest following his blasphemy in saying that the Earth wasn't the centre of the universe. He has been placed in this trapped mansion to make it practically impossible for him to escape. And he has also been entrapped with a one-of-a-kind mechanical monstrosity, a mechanical man that is there to torment him. It speaks with the Pope's voice. It is there to stop him escaping. It's out of place unless, anachronistic, unless, you've really lent in to the weird fantasy elements, but there's nothing wrong with that. The designer says it's explicitly meant to replicate the kind of chase sequences that you find in 80s slasher flicks, but for me it very much was more reminiscent of the Terminator, if the Terminator was sadistic rather than unrelentingly murderous. That said, I am not sure how that chase element will necessarily work in play, because usually when confronted with a monster, players will fight the bitter end and try to find some way to destroy it, which is something that higher level adventurers are fairly likely to accomplish and lower level adventurers are more likely to be slaughtered by, so finding the balance is going to be tricky. But I have a feeling people are either going to side with Galileo and run away, or explore the house prison that he was in. So I don't think you're necessarily going to get double duty out of this book. But the idea of it being a double feature in the way that Grindhouse Cinema was, that's a nice one. And there is more going on, obviously, because there is the Inquisition involvement, the persecution of Galileo, the potential of helping him escape and get somewhere else, potential crossover with some of the other adventures in the same sort of period, the same sort of geographical area. So, there is more going on here than perhaps you might first expect. The automaton itself isn't necessarily as tough as it needs to be, again, potentially because of the kind of power level that some adventurers might be at. It will depend on your table. You might need to bump up its power level a bit, but I don't think you'll need to bump it down. It's meant to be utterly terrifying. The wrestling moves help make the combat a little bit less tedious than old school combat can be. Add a little bit of variety, and you could always expand it even further if you wanted. But it's got a dozen moves, and you're unlikely to be running a game for a group of 12 characters, so you're unlikely to need to replicate those over again. You've got stats for Galileo if you ever wanted such a thing. There are some other devices and so on, like a more scientific lightning thrower rather than a magical one, which you might find interesting. There's some intriguing traps and some intriguing spins on things, like the neighbours that live around that might hear the racket and come looking. It's an interesting ragtag group of NPCs that you could use elsewhere, and you get a nice, if completely undetailed, map of Florence, which is kind of helpful as well. So yeah, this might be my favourite out of the new releases. In terms of style, you got a nice object here, hardback, colour page backgrounds, black and white, striking art of high quality, and fairly evocative. I'm not sure it needed to be colour. If it had been just printed on cream paper, then Ranji might have saved a bit of money, and it would have looked just as good, or like 90% as good as it is. I particularly like this double spread with the lightning gun. So style then, a high 4, almost a 5 for style out of this. Substance wise, you could potentially use the automata again. The NPCs are interesting and useful. The wrestling moves you might be able to port to something else. It's certainly more reusable than a lot of adventures are. Is the adventure itself reusable? Like I say, it describes itself as a kind of grindhouse double feature, but like I said, I think people are going to diverge and do one or the other. But it does mean that you could just change Galileo's prison house and drop it into a game some other time, or you could run one aspect of this for one group and another aspect for another group, or as a convention game. The chase, I don't think, is as engaging as it could be, because we all know players are going to either fight and win or fight and die at the first point of it. Getting players to run away from things is difficult, so I'm not sure how you would get that to work unless you kind of set expectations going into this and said, look, this adventure only really works if you run away from the monster. How acceptable that is at your table, I think, will depend on your group. So then, 4 out of 5 for style, 4 out of 5 for substance, high 4s, certainly for style, middling 4 for substance, but overall that's going to give this a 9 out of 10, 4.5 out of 5. Of the new releases, this seems like the one to get to me, though it is high on the weird technological, weird science side, so that won't be for everybody. But for me, this is the epitome of a good Lamentations game. Weirdness, historicity in combination, and with enough stuff that can be used elsewhere that it's just not a one and done adventure. Zang.
I don't often make explicitly political games, but The Little Grey Book is one of them. It's a parable about this social media panopticon we've all made, where everyone is always watching each other for anyone who steps out of line in any way. And The Little Grey Book is about the inescapability of upsetting someone. It's a one-trick pony, but it's a good one-trick pony. Available at DriveThruRPG and post-mort.com.